So a very good morning to our viewers here in the United States and good afternoon to our viewers in Europe. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany. Thank you all for joining us today. Over the past few months, we've held dozens of online discussions and reached hundreds, if not thousands, of unique viewers across the country and on both sides of the Atlantic. The success of our online programming has prompted us to convene smaller groups for more informal discussions. And so we decided to hold a special briefing for our board members as well as our corporate members. And that's what we're doing today. It goes without saying that individuals, communities, and countries have all been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the private sector is facing its own set of challenges. I'm delighted to be joined by two board members today to discuss how global multinational companies have been affected by the coronavirus crisis. Joining us from Germany is Linn Teigland. She's EY's managing partner for the EMEIA region, that's Europe, the Middle East, India, and Africa, and also serves as EY's global leader for Women Fast Forward. Julie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. I'm really excited to be here. And I have to apologize. EY really loves letters, so I'm sorry about that.
It is a little bit of an alphabet soup, but then so is the ACG sometimes. So we're in good company. Also joining us is Wayne Smith. He's been a member of the board of directors of BASF SE since 2012 and the CEO of BASF Corporation since 2015. Wayne, thanks to you as well for making time for this today.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to share some experiences that we've had in the last few months.
Well, great. And I'm really, really delighted to see both of you. I'm just sorry that we can't be doing this in person, but I hope that will be the case in the not so distant future. So Wayne, let's start with you. You're with BASF, a multinational corporation with German roots, and you're based just across the river in New Jersey. Obviously, I want to hear about the impact that the pandemic has had on the global operations of BASF. But before you tell us a little bit about that, can you tell us how the corona crisis has impacted you personally?
Personally, well, probably similar to our audience here. The good news is I spend more time with my family, which is not so bad. And I have a little bit less travel because the travel schedules for some of us can get a little bit crazy. But I would say that the challenge is not being able to travel, frankly, because I would say pre-corona, probably half of the time I was on the road, meeting with customers or business partners or investors. And we can still do these things and we manage some of this virtually, like we do here with today's meeting, but it does get a little bit more challenging. And I think relationship development maybe becomes more of a challenge. But all in all, it's okay. You know, it's been effective. We've been able to be effective remotely.
And Julie, you're with EY, a global service provider with roots in the US, and you're based in Germany. How has the crisis affected you personally?
Well, actually really similar to Wayne. I think I usually travel about 4 to 5 days a week. And since end of February, actually, we've been pretty much in lockdown across Germany. Now that's opened up, but I have to say that not everybody is really comfortable with the travel yet. And so while we see some levels of normality returning, it has been a very different environment to work with. Steve, as you know, I have 4 children, so being at home with your kids is great. One side, it's a bit annoying on the other. 2 of my kids are older, they're studying, and they've been, you know, they were isolated for several months by themselves, trying to do online courses and complete their university studies. So that's been unusual. I think it's been amazing to see how much outreach there's been. So we've all been at home individually. And at the same time, I feel like there's more outreach and telephones and video calls than ever before, especially in a private perspective, not only from a work environment, but also privately. And that's had good sides and bad sides. I would echo Wayne's comment. I think it's quite okay to continue a relationship using the virtual environment. It's really hard to build a new one on this. It's hard to get to know each other. And then while you can exchange details and CVs and historical information, that personal spark is just not there.
Since you both talked about traveling less today than you were before the pandemic, this is something I've heard. I've seen it myself. I've heard it from a number of people. Folks in Germany will say, "Oh, I live in Berlin. I don't need to go to Frankfurt anymore for that one-day meeting because I can do it. I can do the meeting virtually." The same thing here in the U.S. I'm not planning on going to Washington for just one meeting because there are alternatives. But I guess the question I have for each of you is do you think that this will be part of the new normal for you and your colleagues even after there's a vaccine? Do you think that people will be traveling less? And do you think that we'll be using online formats like this one more moving forward?
Sure, I do think it's part of the new normal. I can't imagine that we ever go back as a company to the travel schedules that we had before. Clearly, in many cases, as Julie mentioned, if you have the relationships developed, whether it's internally with your teams around the world or it's an external partner, the Zoom or the WebEx, it works pretty well. And I think you can be, in many cases, more efficient. In fact, even when we organize just internal meetings, let's say we organize a leadership meeting of, say, 25 or so people in this country, in the US, pre-COVID, this could take us a couple of months to find the date where we could get, let's say, 80% of the people to attend because they're all over flying and doing something else. Today, we get 100% sort of organized in 24 hours because, frankly, you can be more efficient. But as Julie mentioned, when it comes to new relationships, whether they're with customers or any external organization, or even people that are new to your company, this is hard. I mean, you really do need to have some face time. So I would see a hybrid sort of model between, the remote and the travel in the future.
And I would very much agree with that, Steve. Just to build on what Wayne said, I definitely agree with everything you said. It's a hybrid model. I think if you think about the organization that I help run, we are a professional services organization, so it's people getting together. We have a very specific culture at EY, and I really believe to develop that culture and to maintain that culture, you need to be very thoughtful and purposeful, which means, well, I don't ever see us going back to the travel schedules like Wayne said. No, I don't see myself going back to 5 days a week on the road. I do think I'm going to be more purposeful about ensuring that we invest in specific events for people to understand teaming, to develop our culture, to get to know each other. Those probably won't be standard learning and development things. They won't be business meetings, but we're going to have to think very carefully about that. And I know that other companies that I'm advising are also thinking, hey, we do have a specific corporate culture. Some of that needs to be face-to-face. And so very, very consistent to what Wayne's thinking. It's not going to be a black or white. I read with interest a lot of the tech giants who are convinced they can all be virtual forever. I don't think EY will be able to do that. And I'll be very specific. I think a lot of organizations want to maintain that culture. And let's face it, at the end of the day, we're still human. You need that personal contact. Not every day, not traveling every day, but there's some mix there.
So Julie, let me ask you to unpack that a little bit more. I mean, obviously, EY offers a range of professional services, and you are responsible for a huge region, a collection of regions, really, Europe, the Middle East, India, and Africa. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the pandemic has actually impacted the work that you do throughout that geographic region?
Oh gosh, well, let me start off by saying when the pandemic really hit, end of February, and frankly, even beginning of February, if you look at what was happening in Italy and Spain, by the end of February, we had moved, for my small region, we moved 130,000 people within a matter of 10 days to working remote and online. That was a huge feat for us. And if I reflect back in just the short amount of time that we were able to use and ramp up the leverage of technology was actually quite amazing and consistent with what I'm seeing with actually many of the clients that we're looking at as well. We've been able to really accelerate that. So I would say working from home, accelerating the use of technology in all forms. We went to a model that immediately went, we were on Skype, being very honest, using Skype quite a bit as a company. We went immediately, we had kind of leveraged Teams and we're halfway through the deployment. We completed that within days, put everybody on Teams, ramped down Skype because it killed our bandwidth. Leveraged in the beginning things like Zoom and WebEx calls. And we still have some of those, but really ramped up in how we work. We have a system, Steve, that involves virtual interactions called wave spaces. It's a methodology of how we work. We put that in a virtual modus. That's worked really well with interacting with our clients, allowing us to show things, do online polling immediately within a platform, which has been terrific. But it's really changed how we've thought about the client intimacy, the need for us to get closer to clients and understand what's happening. And at the same time, the accessibility. You know, as Wayne said when he was trying to get a meeting, he said he could get one within 24 hours to get it arranged. And I feel like it's been that way with our clients too, Wayne. We've been able to see them a lot more frequently in a virtual world than you would in a physical world, just because they're not traveling. They're open to that. It's short, it's efficient, and that's required us to rethink how we work. And so if I was going to summarize, Steve, I would say virtual, technological, a lot more agile, and a lot more close to our clients, which is, for EY, it's been a good development. It hasn't been an easy time. Please don't underestimate that. It's been a tough time dealing with the issues in Spain, you know, dealing with some of the issues in Italy. If I look at India, Middle East, South Africa, these are really tough hit places. But the movement from a business perspective has actually been overall different, challenging, but also positive.
So one quick footnote before pivoting over to you, Wayne, and that is, has everybody been able to make that shift within the EY community and your clients? Or has it been hard to sort of bring the entire company along?
I actually can say that surprisingly, everybody's been able to make that shift. And there would be pockets maybe, Steve, where, you know, our facility managers, okay, they've been busy doing projects and online things. They haven't been doing what they normally do. But we've been really able to effectively do that. Where I worry, being very transparent on the call, is in some cases we've gone so fast with that immediate that we need to go back and make sure people have the fundamental training and the tips and tricks of how to really leverage the best out of the technology. I still think there's more efficiencies we can get by training people better. They're doing it because it's intuitive, because they've had to, but there's a little bit of things we could do on the way. So I feel like we've been able to pivot in that direction and take most of our people with. I don't want to underestimate, though, the strain that this has put on our people, especially our younger people who are working remotely that honestly that don't have an office in their house. Some of them don't have desks in their house. Some of them have very small children at home, and all of these things put a strain on our people. So when I say that we've been able to do that, I also want to be very cautious not to imply that that's not been without a tremendous amount of effort on the behalf of all of our teams and our employees. And I'm really thankful for that. Thanks,
Julie. Wayne, so coming to you, and of course BASF is a very different company, right? Involved in manufacturing, involved in R&D. Obviously there are some office workers who could make the shift to working from home, but you can't do that if you're actually producing things or if you're conducting research to produce things. How have the global operations of BASF been affected?
Yeah, let me first mention a couple of things that Julie did. I concur with some of what was said. What we said in the middle of March is those who can work from home must work from home. And that was about 40% of our population. The other 60% is in manufacturing, as you say. It was a forced sort of learning, but we surprised ourselves, like a lot of companies, and said, you know, we could do this. And it is fairly effective. And I think, Julie, you mentioned even connections with customers. This is true, especially maneuvering through this pandemic when it's hard to view what demand looks like in the marketplace beyond a few weeks. Both sides, the customers wanted more interaction with us and we wanted more with them. And what might have been weekly conversations within a business unit with a customer were daily, or sometimes 2 times a day. So I think we've learned a lot. We were forced to learn, but frankly, we can take some of this forward. Yeah, on the manufacturing side, this is crucial for us. So we are, maybe just to give you a flavor of the company, so we're global. So we have about half of our sales in Europe, about a quarter in North America, around about 20% in Asia. China's a big piece of what we do. We have a couple of hundred manufacturing plants around the world, and a lot of movement between the plants, with supply chain. Precursors made in one site, then you would ship to another site and finish it. So the global aspect is important. The first thing we said when it became clear we had to do something is we initiated our crisis management teams, and fortunately we have them in every region. Certain regions like North America, we've utilized them a number of times with hurricanes and such, so we know how to do this, but we said this is basically a country by country decision around the world, because these are local laws, local regulatory environments, and we can't set some global standard for our company that says this is what we do. We had to leave it to the countries or the regions, if you will. So we came up with some criteria. We said first priority is protect our people. Second priority is serve our customers. Third priority is protect the company, if you will, because we had to worry about liquidity and some of these topics when customer demand was a little bit, we were a little bit blind, if you will. In terms of the manufacturing, we had to immediately lock down the sites. Because if you think about a big manufacturing site, maybe you have 1,500 or 2,000 people there. And then a particular day, you have lots of visitors. You have suppliers coming, you have contractors coming, you have salespeople coming, you have, you name it, project people coming. And we had to immediately declare only those who are absolutely involved in the day-to-day manufacturing of the product to sell to the customer can come to the site. And so the securities were set up everywhere. Temperatures are taken at every one of our sites every day around the world. Forms have to be filled out with questionnaires. All of the personal protective gear had to be organized and new procedures set in place. And the good news is our people accepted it, and we've been safe, frankly. So we have a handful of cases around the world, COVID-related cases. Well, it's more than a handful, but we have 115,000 people. We have a couple of hundred cases that have developed over the months, but it's a small percentage, no worse than society. I'd say the good news is the cases they come from the outside world. They come from society. We haven't had transmission cases within the factory, because that's what we worry about. If there's a transmission within the factory that spreads, you might be forced to shut something down. Yeah. And so far we've been able to avoid that. But we spent a lot of time on that. Now, I will say, I think we've been successful so far, but we start to see some hotspots around the world. I mean, even here in the US, I think everybody reads in some of the southern states, the cases are rising dramatically, and we do see instances, again, people bringing from home, if you will, the virus into the site, and we have to quickly isolate it and quarantine the people that have been working with that person. So far, it's manageable, but we have to keep our eyes on it.
Great. Steve, can I just comment? Wayne, I'm so impressed because I think you outlined exactly our top 3, and then we added one more. We said safety, client engagement, and people engagement. We combined those. We said business continuity, and then we've added one because I think this crisis, this COVID at least, is going to be with us for a while. We said we need to pivot to the next and beyond to talk about resilience, because I think we've got to fundamentally, and I know you paraphrased it with Steve, and this new normal, moving towards building this resilience into the firm. I think we're going to see these spikes across the globe for at least until we have a vaccination. So I completely agree with your strategy. And I think it's funny, we have such different businesses, but yet in fundamentals like that, completely aligned.
Sure.
So Wayne, I'd like to ask a follow-up question and then fold in a couple of viewer questions to the two of you. And I guess the follow-up question, because it has a lot to do with how BASF works. Obviously, in recent months, we've read a lot about the disruption of global supply chains. And I'd be particularly interested in knowing how BASF has been affected by some of that disruption, whether it's been direct or indirect. And I think from both of you, it'd be interesting to hear, what the implications of that disruption might mean global trade and for foreign direct investment?
Sure. So I can say, fortunately, so far, we haven't had any supply disruptions in the chain that have caused us to, short our customer, if you will. But that wasn't easy to get to that point. So the people in our supply chain teams they've probably been the most stressed of all the people in the organization in this new environment, because there were a lot of close calls, and they're working from home and they're working around the clock to try to piece things together because there were challenges. We do send material in a lot of different locations within countries, between countries, and over the oceans. But we've been able to manage it. But I would say it brings the topic more and more to the forefront. This had already started a year ago with the trade frictions between Europe, the US, China, the US, and so on, where people are forced to think about these topics and try to plan a little bit better. And I think that this will be with us for a while, whether it's pandemic-related concerns or it's trade friction-related concerns. We have to take more care in setting these things up. And for us, it would be about new investment decisions. If we're going to invest in a new factory somewhere, we have to think very hard, where exactly do we want to put that? And how do we want to think about that chain before we make the investment? But so far we've been hanging in there.
And Julie, thoughts from your perspective vis-a-vis perhaps some of the clients that you work with?
Yeah, we see a big change, Steve, when we talk around supply chains. And frankly, across Europe, we see a huge change. We just did a recent study on European attractiveness, which looking at how the US, China, Japan is investing and looking at Europe and assessing as to where they would invest. And a lot of that has to do with, as Wayne pointed out, new factories, new supply chain elements. And we noticed that companies both within and without Europe are really looking at adjusting their supply chains to de-risk them somewhat, to ensure that they have multiple providers, not only for the critical items, but for the next layer down, and to make sure that there's an element of almost localization that they want to get, a better handle and control in that supply chain, and realizing that they need to be seen both from a control, a risk, but also a nationalistic perspective to be contributing back to their local community. And so I think if you look across at least my part of the world, you're going to see a lot of companies reassess their supply chain, build in a little bit more diversity, primarily below those critical items list, because the critical items, they already did that. They're going to really look at the concept of what are they doing in terms of local suppliers, how are they giving back to the local community, and make sure that that's represented. Now, probably not a day and night shift, Steve, and this will take time, but I will think you're going to see a reassessment in this direction. You will see multiple factors coming into play and looking at supply chains, cost being one of them, but not the most material one going forward. And there's other things playing into that, right? People are looking at more and more the sustainability around their entire supply chain. And so you're going to see preferences being executed on whether it's localization, out of nationalistic reasons, or supply chain sustainability reasons. They are going to make adjustments. And so supply chain is one of the knock-on effects that I think out of this COVID crisis, the next 24 to 36 months, you're going to see a lot of changes in that respect.
I would say one of our customer industries is the automotive industry. We sell about 15 to 20% of our products into that. And that may be one of the most, if not the most, let's say, complex global supply chains. It's stunning to see how parts are developed and assembled and how many times they're shipped back and forth across countries, across oceans. It's amazing. So I would say there's no doubt that that industry will try to tackle this to a certain degree.
This actually is a perfect segue to two questions that are related and come from two of our viewers. You've talked a little bit about sort of shifting corporate values, corporate priorities, partly because of the crisis, but also just in terms of how the global economy is changing and evolving. And Elke Raybach, one of our newest board members, writes from Chicago the following: against the backdrop of several crises converging together, the public health crisis, the economic crisis, and the social justice crisis, Are you reconsidering your organization's larger role in society, among other things, by reformulating your corporate values?
Well, what I might start by saying is, unfortunately, our company, and it being European-based and in particular Germany-based, has always had more of a stakeholder sort of approach than a shareholder-only approach. So, I mean, I've worked for other companies, US-based companies, where they say the only thing that counts in the world of business is the shareholder, nothing else, the owner of the company. But we've never had that view. So even in this crisis, we took a lot of care, especially, again, within Germany, to make sure that we approach things right, that we took care of our employees. So some people were put on short-time assignments, but it was, I would say, minimized and very carefully and respectfully done. Senior management took pay cuts to show solidarity. We procured as a company 100 million masks out of China to be delivered to healthcare systems in Germany. And we've produced, I don't know, nearly 1 million liters of disinfectants. You know, we converted some of our facilities around the world to do this, and it was all donated to health systems around the world. So all with a view of, let's make sure that we are in a holistic way trying to do the right thing as a company. Now, I would say with some of the racial strife in the United States, this is, it's an opportunity, but it's also a necessity for us to go even further, frankly, in terms of how we think about our role in society. And I would say we've been engaging, we've made some public statements that maybe we wouldn't have made in the past. We've been engaging much more deeply with our employee groups, which is a good thing, but it is moving in the direction of what you just said, you know, rethinking a little bit the role of the corporation.
And Julie, what about for you?
Steve, I would maybe start off, we're not a corporation, we're a partnership, and our partnership has been established based on a strong sense of values. Those haven't changed. In that context, we have a really strong purpose at EY. We're there, we believe, to build a better working world. We talk about that value proposition for our employees, for our clients, in terms of building that better world. And our strategy is really based on delivering long-term value in 4 aspects, and we track and measure that. It's our value for wider society, how many lives we impact. We have a very clear goal to impact 20 billion lives by 2030. We measure the value that we provide to our clients in terms of their satisfaction. We measure the value we imply to our employees in terms of their experience with EY, the learning, the development that we give them, the career opportunities. And then, of course, we would measure our financial value in terms of how we can invest back into the business. So I would say in the back of COVID, we've really had an awesome opportunity, if I could say it like that, and it sounds terrible to say it like that, but a brilliant opportunity to bring our purpose to life around building a better working world. We've done some amazing things across the globe. I'll give you an example. My India firm has done just a terrific job in reorganizing the supply chains for 30 million meals within a period of days to really help migrant workers. We've helped build ventilation machines in Belgium. We've helped the government do stimulus programs, designing them, but also making sure that they get to the right companies. If I look across the UK, Germany, and France, for example, we've been working with the EU on developing PP&E supply chain platforms to ensure that the right life science and medical equipment gets to the right place and the right level of prioritization at the right quality, which has not always been so easy. And all of this work has been done in a combination of pro bono, because it's doing the right thing, or as a normal service where we've contributed additional resources. And so it's been great to see how all of us across EY have really come together to give back. I really can't emphasize enough in a time of crisis how important that purpose is. And as your viewer commented, it's amazing to see how that unifies and galvanizes our people. But it does cause us to reassess, and I would echo Wayne's comments. Even EY, that's done a lot in the concept of diversity and inclusion, has been asking ourselves, are we doing enough? We've made some very public commitments around doing more and standing against racism and ensuring that we're driving towards a concept that says equity for all. and respecting all different aspects of society. And so I do think each one of us needs to take the opportunity in the context of that crisis to look in the mirror and evaluate our strategy. Are we doing the right things? And we're always doing a lot, but there's always room for improvement. And I think it's great to see all of us look and make those small tweaks or changes to adapt.
I think this next question sort of builds on the conversation we're having right now and touches on an issue that both of you have raised earlier, namely resilience, but also sustainability. One of our corporate members here in New York, Tara Hariharan with NWI Management, asks the following question. How are BASF and EY leveraging the immediate changes due to COVID toward possible longer structural shifts to address issues such as climate change and more sustainable business practices? Now, Wayne, let me start with you because I know that sustainability is an important part of BASF. As a matter of fact, in 2011, the company introduced a statement of purpose saying, "We create chemistry for a sustainable future." So has the current crisis caused you to think differently about sustainability?
Well, I would say sustainability, the importance of it, which is hugely important. It's, as you mentioned, it's in our purpose statement. It hasn't changed one bit due to the crisis. The crisis we see is a very short-term topic. Maybe it's 6, 12, 18 months, I don't know. But at some point, we will somehow normalize the world a little bit. So this is short-term. Sustainability is absolutely core for the long term. For two reasons it's important to us. One, we think we can bring solutions. We have a big, let's say, research and critical mass of researchers that can bring ideas and solutions to a lot of these problems. The other is we're fundamentally an energy-intensive company. So we know that we have to find ways to get better and to contribute to the solutions. We made a long-term commitment that by 2030 we'll grow our company by 50%, but add no incremental CO2 to the environment. And again, for an energy-intensive company, that's hard. That's a hard thing, but we think we can get there. So that hasn't changed. I would say we drive it just as hard as we would have thought about it 6 months ago before this crisis. One area that's I find interesting in societal narrative around plastics, because we're a big plastics or polymer producer. This has been in society's mind a lot in the last number of years around plastic waste in the environment. And how do we develop a more circular economy? And what you hear in some of the narrative today is they revive the topic of plastics saying, well, we've learned in this COVID environment the plastics that go into critical medical devices or once through bags that are, cannot be reinfected by the COVID and such is a good thing. Our view would be the material's always been a good thing. The issue is how do we control the end of life and develop a circular economy? And that's what we're focused on, and that won't change. It won't change one bit because society is driving it. It's important to people, and we will continue to go ahead full speed.
And Julie, what about EY in terms of the sustainability question?
I think we had this on our agenda before, Steve. We've seen the movement coming, and as part of our commitment in the World Economic Forum this year, actually, we released a statement that said that EY would be carbon neutral by the end of this year. Now, I'll be really honest with you. I have less of an issue, and maybe more of an issue on the other side than Wayne. Less of an issue because I'm not a manufacturer. I'm a people's business. More of an issue because our people are required to travel when our clients demand it. And that's tough for us. Now, I have to be honest, it's a little bit of good fortune with the crisis that we're going to have it easier this year to make those targets. But I have to tell you, it's about driving sustainable change. And Wayne and I have been talking about it on this call about this concept of the new normal, which I hate, but this new reality that's there. We will not do business in the same way that we've done it before Christmas. Now, will it be that everybody does everything over Zoom? I don't think so, but we will find a way to maintain our carbon neutrality, and that means changing how we're looking at supply of the energy in our offices. It's changing our travel patterns. It's changing our behavior. And so this is a tough task for us, Steve, but it's top and center. I just feel we're not credible when we're advising our clients on the importance of sustainability if we're not making a statement in that direction ourselves. And so we really felt it was time, not something brought around by COVID. It'll certainly be accelerated in the behavioral change on the back of this crisis.
One topic we've not really talked about yet is innovation. And yet I know that that is a key term, a key factor, both for BASF and for EY, both in terms of how you work internally, but also how you work with external partners. And board member Joe McLaughlin wrote in to point out that BASF spends almost 500 million, or spent almost 500 million euros last year on R&D alone. His question is, what's the effect of working from home on team creativity? And I guess that my question would have been, has the current crisis been a catalyst for more innovation, or has it impeded innovation in your organizations?
So what I would say is, Joe, we spent 500 million euros on R&D in the first quarter last year. So we spent about 2 billion. So it's a big number, about 10,000 researchers. Wow. Your question is a good one. I would say in the very short term, getting through this crisis, we've had to be creative. So to keep laboratories going, some of them are research-based, some of them are supporting manufacturing plants with quality control and such. We've actually gone to shift models. So if a laboratory was operating on an 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 basis, now we operate 2 or even 3 shifts so that people can be in a staggered way in the lab and keep people further apart, if you will. So we've been able to find a way to survive going through it. I would say on where we've had support from an innovation standpoint has been more about the business model that we discussed. You know, this whole thing forced us to work from home, and we were forced to think about working with customers in a different way and such, and it's worked. When it comes to the traditional, say, research field, I think you need the personal interaction. You know, you need people from different backgrounds, you know, a chemical engineer, a chemist, a physicist, a biologist, in the same room or in the same floor where they're always bumping into each other and talking and bouncing ideas off their heads. That's critically important. And I think, you know, whatever this new normal is when we get back to the normal working environment, we have to keep that alive. Personal interaction, I think, is important, really, really critical in the innovation space.
Steve, I'm not so sure I would add too much to that. I think that's absolutely true. You need personal interaction. But I have to say, I'm in a lucky space that we're not looking at chemicals or bioelements to bring together. Our innovation is a lot of in our minds, and with the software and the computer products that we can use, that's been an advantage for us. I still think the crisis has given us a chance to develop creativity, to look to leverage some of the things that we've built, especially in the technology space, and then to look forward. So it's allowed us a little bit of a breather and a reset. I will be looking forward to the time when we can get our teams more together. Maybe not every day, but occasionally more together in that respect. I do think that diversity that Wayne talks about breeds simply excellent ideas. And while you can get it, see it, and feel it in the happy hours and the coffees and the Zooms, it's somehow not the same. Mm-hmm. And I hope I'm not saying anything that surprises anyone on the call today. But
So another viewer question from Alexandra Opachowski, who's with EY here in New York. Shifting gears a little bit, he'd like to know whether the current US visa policy until the end of 2020 will have an impact on global mobility. And I think, you know, my follow-on question to that would be, how do you see your organizations and your clients affected by this as well?
Well, for us, it's a real concern. You know, we have at any given time about 1,000, we call them delegates, living in a different country around the world. We encourage this as a personal development concept for people. Certainly, if they want to move up the management ranks, they need to really at some point live overseas. And so it's an important thing for us. And it's been a challenge, frankly, since this last order was issued. There's a lot of people who are unsure, and we have to slow down our hiring decisions and think about this hard. I can only hope that this is a short-term topic that came up. Regardless of who wins in the election, I couldn't imagine this gets relaxed. But I don't have any special information, but I can imagine that. But it's a problem right now.
Wayne, I think this is a huge problem. I think irrespective of short-term travel barriers due to COVID, I think we need, I can say as EY, we have a commitment to global mobility. We need people with diverse backgrounds. We need to provide them developmental experiences by working in different markets and coming together. It's part of, it sounds a little bit kitschy, it's the fabric of the firm. And so I do think this is a concern for us. We need to make sure that we're still committed to global mobility, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, 3-year assignments. We need this. It's part of how this global network works and how we are committed to continuing to drive a global firm. You can drive a global firm from the tone at the top, coming down, the policies, the structure, but at the end, if you don't bake that into the fabric, into the people and into the culture, it's never gonna work. And part of that fabric and culture is shared experience. And so I really think, and I view this with concern, you know, we need to be able to exchange and develop our best talents by giving them experiences cross-border. It doesn't just apply to the US, it applies to borders across the globe. We've got to make sure that we can continue to do that. And it's just been a good practice, one that I know BASF invests in for years, and one that EY is completely committed to.
Thank you both. Andrew Gundlach, one of our board members here in New York, has a comment and a couple of questions. So let me sort of try to pull them together. He points out that the corona crisis has accelerated changes that most of us knew were coming. He points out that many CEOs feel that the next 3 years of change have basically come about in about 3 months, that this has served as a tremendous catalyst for change. He goes on to say that Germany's industrial edge has been based on a century-long dominance of the piston engine and in certain areas of chemistry, some of which is included in BASF's work at its founding and today. With the electric car gaining share, the dominance of the piston engine becomes less relevant. And so Andrew would like to know how prepared Germany is for a country, as a country, for this new economic environment. So that would be sort of the first part of the question, but the second goes to you specifically, Wayne. How prepared is BASF for that changed world? And what are you doing to get cultural change in the workforce at the pace of the changes to the market?
Okay, there's a lot there. No, I think you're right that the pandemic has forced us to make moves within our company at a very rapid pace that when you look back in the last 3 months, you say, why couldn't we have done some of this faster or earlier? Maybe we saw some of it coming, but we were on more of an incremental path towards change. And that's a fair statement. But in terms of markets, as an example, electric cars, you know, we have about 15 to 20% of our revenues go into the automotive space, whether it's paints and coatings or catalysts or plastics, engineering plastics, all kinds of things. So this transition to electric vehicles is a huge one for us and obviously the car industry. But we see it as a huge opportunity. So we're investing hundreds of millions into advanced battery materials to be part of the battery system, if you will. But we know that we will also lose sales from internal combustion engine sort of historical programs that we have. But you can never worry about that. You can't have a Kodak moment where Kodak was the inventor of the digital camera, but was so worried about transitioning to something new that they ultimately basically disappeared. We go at it with full force. I think Germany as a country is moving quickly in this area. Certainly the big OEMs are driving this hard. There is an attempted coordination with the governments to be supportive and with supply chain development. You know, for example, I mentioned we're investing in battery materials. There is some European funding and German funding out there to help build local supply chains with this. so that we don't, Europe does not become dependent only on China or only on Korea for these critical materials, and somehow we develop a local supply chain in Europe. So I think there is movement there. It's always hard to coordinate things with, from a government standpoint, but the companies are focused very dramatically on this.
And Julie, any thoughts on how well prepared Germany is for this changing landscape?
If you would have asked me 3 months ago, mid-crisis, I would have been a little bit more critical. And the reason I say that is I think Germany, a country backed by engineers, seeing is believing goes a really long way. And that change in the first 6 weeks was just so tremendous that it's really forced, partially because of the crisis and driven economically, but it's really forced the wide breadth of middle market to embrace the change and to figure out new ways of working. That means taking cost out, digitalizing a large part of their back office, re-looking at the innovation in their production and in their supply side. And I know Germany is well equipped by all of the economic stimulus plans that have been set out to actually provide the support needed to help the companies get there. And so while I was actually critical over the past few months that maybe Germany's middle market would kind of sleep through the transformation and not go fast enough, I'm actually convinced the COVID crisis has been almost a wake-up call, Steve, for them to really refocus and rejuvenate and redesign and reimagine their business for the future. And no, they don't have all the answers. It's not all worked out yet, but they're on it, they're moving, and there is economic support from the government to get there. And so I actually think you're going to see Germany come out of it with being stronger than before, but I'm convinced that they're on it. So I actually think it's optimistic.
I think in a lot of ways, the current combined crises have been a wake-up call for a lot of people, and that this really could be an inflection point in terms of doing some things very differently moving forward. And one topic that you've both touched on has been diversity and inclusion, but we haven't really talked about the gender aspect of the COVID crisis. And Julie, in addition to serving as managing partner for EMEIA, you're EY's global leader for Women Fast Forward. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you at least one question about the gender aspect of all of this. Women, of course, have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about how this has played out in Germany or in the region that you're responsible for, and what your thoughts are on where we are in that regard.
This is a topic that's really, I would be amiss to say it's close to my heart. I really see a tremendous risk out there. We've been working for years together across the globe on trying to promote gender equality and programs in place. And I really think COVID might throw us back to literally the 1950s. And why do I say that, Steve? It's our women that are largely taking care of the children at home. It's the women that are taking care of the elderly in the most case. It's the women entrepreneurs that are not being provided the respective financing. And if you look at all the stimulus programs that are put in place across the globe, they run through standard bank formats, which means we know that it's proven there is substantial unconscious bias in that. Women have a hard time getting the respective financing. And at the same time, in many of the underdeveloped economies, even those in my region, right? Look at India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Iran, Africa. The economic power is built on the back of very, very small micro businesses owned by women. And so I'm really concerned that all of the progress that we've made will just be wiped out. And I know it's really easy for us as business people to talk about gender equality in the sense of how many women we have on our board or how many managers we have, but we have to forget in the wider breadth of the population, it's a tremendous issue, and the women are going to end up suffering the most on the back of this. My encouragement, Steve, has been for policymakers to make themselves aware and to consider over the next weeks and months what we can do to put certain stopgaps in place to make sure that we don't go completely backwards. And that is tough. I'll tell you, if I look at my own organization, we have a great amount of women in our organization, especially at the entry level and going up. And yeah, when they have children, they're at home trying to juggle it because there is only homeschooling now. And we as companies need to be flexible, we need to be understanding, and we need to be supportive, and we're going to try to work through it together. There is no easy silver bullet answer out there. And so a topic that's really dear to my heart, Steve, a topic I wish I had a 1, 2, 3 recipe to get us there. I think it's something we all need to continue to focus on. And I'm sure in talking to Wayne, I don't need to emphasize the benefits of diversity and why we need this. It's really important in terms of understanding our customers, getting the right answer, better risk management. For all of those aspects, we need good diversity, not just diversity, but also inclusion. And so I hope that gives you a few comments as to why it's important to me.
Thank you. Before bringing the conversation to a close, I'd like to fold in one final viewer question. One of our members here in New York, Sven Ume, actually found an elegant way of bringing the conversation to an end, sort of where we started. We started talking about travel. Both of you said that you would be traveling less, and Sven just wrote that United, for example, has announced that it will furlough 36,000 employees in October. Undoubtedly, other airlines will follow suit. And he asks, what do we do with all of the people being laid off at airports, working for airlines, and whether this is the price that we will have to pay for a greener economy? Do either of you have any thoughts on the implications for the travel industry and particularly for the airline industry in all of this?
You know, I don't have let's say specific comments other than to say it's a challenge. You're right. When the economy shifts in any kind of structural way, you will always have companies and industries that are winners and some that are losers. This is just part of life, and I don't have any optimism, frankly, for the travel industry being able to get anywhere near to where it used to be. So you can only hope that usually in society, when something shifts like that, there are opportunities elsewhere. It doesn't make it easy for the people that are directly impacted at that time, but for society over time, we can normally fill the gaps. But no, it's a big challenge. Yeah.
I think, Wayne, I think you're absolutely right. It is a big challenge, and I'm going to come back to something to say. In those periods, whether it's industrial revolution or digital revolution or in the back of accelerated sustainability drives through COVID, you've got this change. We need to remember as professionals, whether we're privately or business, we need to be investing in our own future careers and development. And that has gotten much easier on the back of this crisis. So you want to reinvent yourself nowadays in the year 2020, actually, with a little bit of internet access, it's actually quite easy to do. And that's where I say, Wayne, I think there's a real hope if we can actually leverage those great skills that are out there. Think of the logistical abilities, think of the digital capabilities that are there, and reskill those people for something else. There is, Steve, not a lack of jobs. It's a lack of the appropriate skills. And if we can get people to have the mindset that in today's world, 2020 and beyond, we need to constantly be learning and continuously reinvesting in ourselves for that next career move, not necessarily the same one that we've been doing for the last 30 years. And if we can be open to that and accepting as an employer and an employee, I think there's going to be a lot for us to be able to bridge that gap in this, call it digital revolution, or in the transformation that we're in. It's not just that industry as well.
You're right. Well said.
Julie, you've sort of teed up perfectly and perhaps even answered the closing question that I had for both of you, which was, you know, obviously this is a period of disruption, and it comes at the sort of end of several years of disruption, and where we've talked a lot about disruptive factors in politics, but also in business. And I guess as I think about the current time, I find myself often wondering, what are the lessons that we can learn from this current period that will help us navigate the future? Obviously, as you just said, Julie, a focus on building skills and providing opportunities. And throughout this conversation, I think both of you have talked a little bit about how things might be different once we finally emerge from the current crisis. But let me ask each of you for maybe a 30-second or minute-long response. What are some of the lessons that we can learn, and how do we go about applying them?
Well, I think, Julie started some of this with her last comment about flexibility. With your own career development or within an organization or a company, you have to be extraordinarily flexible. You can't be rigid in your thinking. The world moves quick, and we have to keep up with it or stay ahead of it. So we have to try to develop, at least I would think about in our company, a culture where people can be bold with what they do. They can take chances. And if something doesn't work, then you quickly deviate and move in a different direction. But we don't overstudy, overanalyze. The world moves too fast. You need to be agile, flexible, quick, and bold, if you will, as an organization.
Darn it, Wayne, I think you stole my line. I think we've learned in this crisis that we've got to be quick, agile, to the point, succinct, and effective. And those are some of the things that we've done together with the crisis management teams. It's really adapted a new way of managing and leading. I don't want to lose that, Steve. I think some of those things have been really, really helpful for us. Not waiting months for a meeting, doing very quick, succinct calls. We've changed how we've organized our leadership structures in terms of the routine of meetings. Don't lose that. And I think no matter how bad the crisis is, and this one was terrible because it was not only economical, it's also personal health, but there is always an upside. No matter what business opportunity you're in, there will be an upside for it for the future. Does it mean you might have to jump? Yes, it does. But there is upside to this. And so I would encourage, as Wayne and I talked about the safety, the being close to clients, the continuity, think of the resilience and the opportunity that brings for business and personally. It's a lot of personal development out there. I can say I've learned more in the last 6 months than the prior 2 years, just because you're forced to. And that's a good thing for us. It develops and challenges us.
And I think we've all learned a lot in the last hour. Julie Teigland, Wayne Smith, I want to thank you both for making the time to speak with us today. This has been an enlightening and inspiring conversation with both of you. And I want to thank you both very, very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Wave. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it immensely. I wish you both well. And to all of our viewers, of course, stay well. And I look forward to reconvening again in person when it's safe to do so.